Every so often, a film comes along that is more of an event than a movie. A big-budget extravaganza that pushes the boundaries of the craft into new realms of special visual and even audio effects. In the earliest days of film, almost anything could wow moviegoers with the novelty of moving pictures. But as film audiences grew more sophisticated, they began looking for bigger and more incredible movies to satiate their lust for spectacle. Especially after the market crash of 1929 and the economic hardships that followed gave them a greater need for escapism. While there had always been big, groundbreaking movies, it wasn't until a certain giant ape came along that the modern blockbuster was born.
Carl Denham is determined to make the biggest movie the world has ever seen. With a beautiful woman set to star, he's enlisted the help of a ship and crew to take him to a mysterious, uncharted island, where he hopes to catch a glimpse of a mythical beast known only as Kong. When they arrive at the island and his leading lady is captured by the monster, though, Denham's plans for a movie evolve into a new desire to capture Kong and bring him back to the mainland to wow audiences as the eighth wonder of the world.
Before we go any further, if you could hit that like button, it would help me appease the great YouTube algorithm. If you really do like this video, be sure to subscribe as well. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. By the early 30s, one of the most popular subgenres was the jungle movie. Whether it was adventure-themed like the ever-popular Tarzan serials, horror-themed like Island of Lost Souls, or even a documentary like Kongorilla, the jungle movie was usually about explorers deep in some exotic rainforest. One of the most successful and spectacular of these was 1925's The Lost World, which featured dinosaurs brought to life by the stop-motion effects of Willis O'Brien. In the early 30s, after several failed attempts to create a spiritual successor to The Lost World, O'Brien was involved in making another big-budget jungle movie with dinosaurs called Creation. But the studio behind the film, RKO, was getting nervous about its growing price tag and their own desperate need to cut costs. Enter Merian C. Cooper. Born in 1893 in Jacksonville, Florida, Cooper had an early fascination with exploration after reading, at the age of 6, Explorations and Adventures in Equatorial Africa, a book that features an exciting hunt for a wild gorilla. In the early 1910s, Cooper was appointed to the U.S. Naval Academy, which he was promptly kicked out of for, quote, hell-raising and championing air power, unquote.
There's one thing we haven't thought of. What? Airplanes.
When the US entered World War I, Cooper, gratified to be proving the Naval Academy foolish for that decision, became part of the Army's new Air Service, a precursor to what would eventually be known as the United States Air Force. Cooper survived being shot down and taken prisoner by the Germans, later joining up with American forces supporting Poland in the Polish-Soviet War, during which he served time in and ultimately escaped from a brutal Soviet POW camp. After he returned home while working as a writer for the New York Times, he and a cameraman he had met during the war, Ernest Schoedsack, went on a voyage to Africa together and filmed a documentary. On the way home, their boat caught fire evading pirates and sank. Undeterred, Cooper and Schoedsack went on another expedition together to Persia, which became the subject of a documentary film called Grass. Grass got the attention of Hollywood, which commissioned the pair to make a few more films, combining their documentary subjects with fictional narratives to make some of the earliest examples of what we'd now call the mockumentary. It's worth noting that around the same time, Cooper also became heavily involved in the creation of Pan American Airways and was one of its founding board members. But once the company got going, he became bored with the business side of the endeavor and decided to stick with Hollywood. Cooper, you have to understand, was a whirlwind of ideas and adventures, the kind of person who is incapable of sitting still or being happy unless he's doing something unprecedented and/or dangerous. He'd had an idea for a movie about an expedition to a remote island that involved a giant ape fighting with some Komodo dragons, which he pitched to Paramount, even spicing things up by adding a woman to the expedition as a way to counter complaints that he'd neglected romance in his earlier films, but with the Great Depression in full swing, the studio wasn't interested. After having his 8th movie rejected, Cooper managed to get a job at RKO, thanks in no small part to his friendship with the vice president, David O. Selznick. Cooper's first order of business was producing The Most Dangerous Game, for which he hired as director his longtime collaborator, Ernest Schoedsack. For this movie, based on the famous short story by Richard Connell, they built large jungle sets and hired, among others, the actors Joel McCrea, Fay Wray, Robert Armstrong, James Flavin, and Noble Johnson. As that production began coming together, Cooper, at the request of Selznick, then took a look at RKO's apparent albatross, the expensive dinosaur movie Creation. That movie was coming together as a financial disaster that could potentially ruin the struggling RKO, so Cooper, wielding executive authority, canceled it, but not before being excited by the special effects work being done by Willis O'Brien. Miriam C. Cooper then went to the executives at RKO and pitched his giant ape concept, replacing his original idea of Komodo dragons with dinosaurs, telling them that he could use sets and actors already being used for The Most Dangerous Game, and that he could recoup some of the expense of Creation by putting O'Brien to work on the effects. Studio executives were wary, but they let him move forward on the project, probably because they remembered the incredible success of 1930's Ingagi, a movie that is, let's say, problematic, in that it features women in blackface having ape babies with gorillas. Long after his initial pitch, after he had actors in place, more polished creature effects, and a more complete script, Cooper went back to his superiors with a full presentation that made them far more enthusiastic about the film, but in the meantime, he had a lot of work to do.
Come on.
But what is it?
It's money and adventure and fame. It's the thrill of a lifetime.
His first task was the screenplay, and for that, he hired the famous novelist Edgar Wallace to write both it and a novel, so that Cooper could fudge a bit and claim his movie was based on a novel by a best-selling author. Wallace delivered a script for a movie simply titled The Beast, but before he could do any revisions or start work on the novel, he died quite suddenly of pneumonia complicated by diabetes. After that, several people worked with Cooper, revising and retitling the script so many times that almost nothing of Wallace's original draft made it into the final film. Eventually, Ruth Rose, the wife of Ernest Schoedsack, who had no previous screenwriting experience, was tasked with cleaning it all up. She ironed out its rough spots, simplified its exposition, and morphed the characters of Denham, Driscoll, and Darrow into none too subtle versions of Cooper, Schoedsack, and herself, respectively. Finally, she changed the title, which at that point was The Eighth Wonder, to just Kong. Sometime later, it was David Selznick himself who added King to the title.
Why, the whole world will pay to see this!
Cooper and Schoedsack split directing duties, with Cooper handling the effects and action sequences, and Schoedsack responsible for most of the live action and exposition scenes. The plan had been to use many of the major actors from The Most Dangerous Game, but one of them, Joel McCrea, asked for too much money to play the heroic Jack Driscoll, and was replaced by the largely unknown Bruce Cabot, who tried to walk out of his audition because he thought he was only being hired as McCrea's stunt double. The female lead wasn't initially supposed to be Fay Wray either. Cooper wanted a blonde in order to contrast against the gorilla's dark fur, and several actresses were considered, including Jean Harlow, Frances Lee, and Ginger Rogers. Fay Wray had not only worked with Cooper and Schoedsack before on The Most Dangerous Game, but she'd also been in their earlier film, The Four Feathers. After Jean Harlow turned down the role of Ann Darrow, Wray told Cooper she would be happy to throw on a blonde wig and give King Kong a go. Cooper let her know that she'd be playing against the tallest and darkest leading man she'd ever seen. For Carl Denham, a character so closely tied to Miriam Cooper that it's hard to separate the two sometimes,
They say he ain't scared of nothing. If he wants a picture of a lion, he just goes up to him and tells him to look pleasant.
Robert Armstrong, another veteran of The Most Dangerous Game, had always been the first choice. The other returning actors were James Flavin as the second mate, and Noble Johnson as the native chief. A fun cameo near the end sees Cooper and Schoedsack themselves piloting the plane that finally takes King Kong down. Naturally, it goes without saying that the biggest star of the film, the tall, dark, leading man Cooper sold Fay Ray on, was the giant ape himself. This is important because prior to King Kong, there had never been a leading character created entirely by special effects. Kong wasn't even a man in a suit. To make Kong work on screen, Cooper, O'Brien, and several others put together every trick in the book to produce something more ambitious and complex than anything the silver screen had ever seen before. O'Brien's stop-motion photography was state-of-the-art at the time, and it was melded with live action using both conventional and brand new miniature frame-by-frame rear projection, traveling matte techniques including the well-tested Williams color process and the brand new optically printed Dunning process, and a lot of clever sleight of hand that would baffle almost everyone in the audience, especially a young boy who had become absolutely obsessed with the film, a boy by the name of Ray Harryhausen. There were a few different models created for Kong, the biggest of which was a life-sized head operated by 3 people, along with a life-sized hand and foot used to grab and crush the beast's various victims. At the time, the RKO publicity department published a lot of fake information about how Kong was put together, not wanting anyone to really understand how any of it worked. There are very few behind-the-scenes images of the effects work. There are no surviving interviews with effects head Willis O'Brien, who was criminally underappreciated in his lifetime, and most of what we now know about the effects has been pieced together almost entirely by conjecture and second-hand accounts. Also revolutionary was the film's musical score, composed by Max Steiner, who would go on to be considered one of the founding fathers of film composition. Steiner had this crazy idea of syncing up the film score to the film itself, of using leitmotifs for individual characters that evolve with the story, of emphasizing the action with stings and percussive hits, of mixing together the sound effects and the music in a new way, and more, all things that had never been done before. RKO, growing more and more nervous about the film's budget with every passing day, scoffed at the idea, preferring to use well-established stock music and refusing to pay Steiner to do any new compositions. Miriam Cooper, though, recognizing the revolutionary potential of Steiner's concepts, paid the musician $50,000 out of his own pocket, for which RKO eventually reimbursed him. As important and groundbreaking as the effects are in King Kong, the soundtrack is just as seminal and influential. Max Steiner's work set the rules by which the modern movie soundtrack is composed and created to this day. King Kong released during the absolute nadir of the Great Depression in March of 1933. Even though the economic reality of the times was abysmal, the movie was an enormous success, making $5 million in theater rentals. Critics absolutely adored it, and audiences enthusiastically spent their hard-earned money to watch it again and again. For a while, many theaters even had round-the-clock, 24-hour showings, and it became an absolute cultural phenomenon unlike any movie before. RKO rushed out a sequel that same year, Son of Kong, and there have been 2 remakes since, 3 if you count the monster vs. Kong Skull Island, along with several spin-offs such as Toho's King Kong vs. Godzilla, and knockoffs, including Cooper and O'Brien's own Mighty Joe Young. None of that really captures the importance of the original film, though. This movie has a legacy that is hard to overstate, as it essentially gave birth to the Blockbuster. It was also the first movie to get an audio commentary track when it released on Laserdisc in the mid-80s.
I think this is awfully exciting. I've never been on a ship before.
Well, I've never been on one with a woman before.
Unfortunately, in 1938, with the Hollywood production code in effect, several scenes were removed from the film before its re-release. In the mere 5 years since its ultra-successful first run, it was deemed that culture had progressed beyond the salacious sensibilities of the pre-code era, that it was necessary to censor the past to protect the present. For several decades, it was feared that all of the censored content was lost forever. Thankfully, in the 60s, the original cut was restored, and modern DVD and Blu-ray releases are based on an uncensored British print. This movie was so big in its day and is so important for the history of cinema now that I don't feel like my opinion of it even matters. But that said, I have to admit I love the original King Kong. This is one of the greatest movies ever made, full stop, And even if you don't like old black and white films or don't think you could look past the archaic special effects and stop motion animation and wonky acting, I suspect you might find to your surprise that this movie has a way of drawing you in. It's one of those films you simply must see at least once in your lifetime.
It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. Which version of King Kong is your favorite? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you really do like these videos, consider joining my Patreon to get access to bonus content, get your name in the credits, and more. My patrons even get to vote on one movie I cover every single month. For written reviews of plenty more science fiction classics in both film and literature, you can also check out my website at emcgill.com. Until next time, though, when we'll talk about some pretty extreme global warming, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
I guess I love you.
Why, Jack, you hate women.